Hi, this is Corncod One of Nationalist News and Notes. The title of my little screed this morning is The Afghan Disaster and Fourth Generation Warfare. The unfolding Afghan disaster is yet another confirmation of the limits of imperialism and the even bigger mistake of listening to neocons. The U.S. should never have gotten involved deeply in Afghanistan. If we wanted to slake the national bloodlust after 9/11, we should have just bombed selected targets for a few months and left things alone. Instead, the U.S. started a civil war against the Taliban government and installed some dubious characters in Kabul. The U.S. Pentagon and State Department then tried to install a centralized bureaucracy, and worse yet, created a multicultural, multilingual, and non-sectarian Afghan army. Only idiots who went to Harvard, Yale, and Princeton could have thought up something as stupid as that in a country as divided as Afghanistan. They even tried to force-feed feminism to a traditional people, which is one of the craziest ideas ever conceived in the mind of man. There comes a point where ideological thinking comes up against the real world of common sense. While we should have completely stayed out of the mess in Afghanistan, the least the military could have done was to actually win the war. The U.S. military is so ideological that they really can't think rationally anymore. You don't win wars in the third or fourth worlds by raising huge multicultural armies and equipping them with all sorts of high-tech weaponry to fight insurgency. Both the Syrian government of Bashar Assad and the Iraqi government both showed the U.S. military how to win wars in the Middle East and West Asia. Assad, oddly a former eye doctor, ran a better war than the allegedly brilliant folks in the Pentagon and the State Department. He had a huge army, but he only used it sparingly. Why? Because the common Syrian conscript was a Sunni Muslim and not to be 100% trusted, because the Assad family are all Alawite Muslims. He used bits and pieces of his army in the Civil War, commando units, elite outfits, etc. So who fought this war? The answer is militias and volunteers. He had all kinds of militias that represented the various elements of Syrian society. He had Alawite militias, Christian militias, Shia militias, tribal militias, Baathist militias, left-wing militias. Any group that was of the opinion that the takeover of Syria by militant Sunni Muslims was bad for them could join the game. Just pick a few leaders of the aforementioned groups, give them a bunch of crates of AK-47s, a few RPG missile launchers, and some heavy machine guns that can be mounted on pickup trucks, and voila! You have a bunch of small armies fighting on your side. These little armies would be fighting for things like religion, tribal loyalty, ethnicity, political ideologies, stuff that matters in people's lives, so that they would be well motivated. Just give them guns and ammo and point them in the general direction of the enemy. He also had a big unpaid volunteer group, the National Defense Forces. It was a part-time outfit. They did do some fighting, but mostly they did a lot of the drudge work, like manning roadblocks and such. Even chicks could join in on the fun. Because Dr. Assad has a freaking brain, he sits pretty comfortably in his presidential palace in Damascus to this very day. Remember 2014 in Iraq? Al-Qaeda was on the march. The new Afghan-trained Iraqi army completely sucked. They threw away their rifles and ran away like a bunch of little sissies. As the enemy approached Baghdad, the thought of having their heads cut off with Al-Qaeda swords concentrated the minds of the Iraqi leadership wonderfully. They had a brilliant idea. Since the enemies were Sunnis and the bulk of the people were Shia, why not make the Shia mullahs and other religious leaders into military leaders? Inside the heart of every man is a little boy, and that little boy wants to command his own army. The Shia religious leaders love the idea of becoming pint-sized generals. The Iraqi government gives them the weapons, and the rest, they say, is history. Why didn't our military leaders think along these lines in Afghanistan? It was because they were a bunch of woke, politically correct morons. That's why.